Whatever the choice, the existence of the measuring judging scales method can no longer be denied or evaded. From A Mini History, Some Background, copyright 2001, S. Ditko. Creator and Conversation presents Steve Ditko, Beyond the Myth, Part 3, Steve Ditko, the Man. Welcome back to our third and final part of our mini-series Steve Ditko, Beyond the Myth. Joining us in this episode is Mark Zen Ditko. Mr. Ditko joins me to discuss his uncle and his life and legacy. It's widely known that Mr. Ditko was a very private man. However, some accounts of his privacy have been exaggerated to the extent that he was a recluse, cut off from society and not willing to engage with anyone. But as we've uncovered with previous episodes, such as last episode with Mr. Jack C. Harris, we learned that Mr. Ditko was a sociable individual as well, who had an interest in film and cinema and storytelling as a whole, and as well as his driving passion for comics. What we learn in our conversation with Mr. Harris is further explored in today's interview with Mr. Ditko is the passion that underlies the work of Mr. Ditko. It's almost impossible, as it's come up in our conversation, to envision Steve Ditko in any other career. However, Mark Ditko helps to unveil a revelation of sorts that Steve Ditko had considered the adaptation of some of his comic stories into other media as well, such as animation and film, and was open to the idea of interpretation or adaptation. I really appreciate Mr. Ditko taking the time out to speak with me. He and his siblings have been working on Ditkoverse and have been looking to publish a lot of Mr. Ditko's creator-owned works, such as Mr. A, and is currently working towards the Steve Ditko Centennial as well, and looking with the new label of Steve Ditko at 100, and we go into detail onto that as well. Of course, Mark growing up with his uncle was, of course, a young child, so his memories and interactions as well with Steve Ditko, some of it would be, lost to time, but his later memories, very, very vivid. His correspondence as well further helped to paint a more elaborate and detailed picture of Steve Ditko as a multifaceted individual. So much has been said about his association with objectivism, which we explored in great detail with Dr. Zach Cruzy in episode 1, which if you haven't heard, I invite you to go back and start with part 1. But we realised that was just one aspect of the interests of Mr. Steve Ditko, and Mark Ditko also unveiled to me while engaged in this Zoom conversation. He revealed behind him was the entirety of Steve Ditko's personal library, and Dr. Zach Cruzy was working his way through cataloguing and noting some of the texts which contained some of Mr. Steve Ditko's original notations and underlinings and notes. So there's definitely an open to not just exaggeration, but a lot of people have been kind of painting Steve Ditko, pardon the pun, with a single brush towards his ideologies and ideas, when really he was just a private individual, yes, but also one with such great creativity, collaboration, and he was a great collaborator, as we learned with Jack C. Harris. I want to thank today's guest as we close out this 3-part mini-series, Mark Ditko, for sharing with me the mini history, a series of 16 short essays on the creation of Spider-Man. This was brought up in conversation with Mark, and afterwards he sent me these essays. I've been reading extracts from them, little quotes at the start of each episode of this mini-series, as it helped to paint a picture in terms of Mr. Ditko's own words. As I mentioned at the start of this mini-series, Steve Ditko was it'd be something of a paradox, this podcast, as he didn't feel that much had to be said around his work, that the work should speak for itself. However, I believe having, read the materials in preparation for this mini-series, having engaged in these interviews, that and in particular this conversation with Mark today, that Steve Ditko was definitely a strong supporter of the truth. And we hope that we've helped in this mini-series to present a more factual and rounded presentation of Steve Ditko. And so, now over to our guest. My thanks again to Mark Zen Ditko. Welcome, Mark Zen Ditko, to Creator in Conversation, concluding out our special three-part dedicated to Mr. Steve Ditko. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Good to be here.
Thank you so much. It's crazy. I'm towards the end of my day. You're just about to start off the day. We're like ships in the night. But no, this is a great opportunity. Just before recording, I was filling you in a little bit with the mission statement for the podcast, and as I was saying, the title we're giving it is Steve Ditko, Beyond the Myth. And as you could probably appreciate, there's been so much that has been within the fandom of comics just taken as assumption, and that assumption to be taken as truth about who Steve Ditko was. So far, we've with Dr. Cruzy, we've looked at his works through an academic lens, and looking at when we analyse the artwork, when we fully understand the intent, how that can enrich and give us new interpretations to his work. We spoke with Jack Harris about what it was like being a collaborator with Mr. Ditko. And now to close things out, I suppose you just want to get a sense of, well, Steve Ditko, the man, I suppose, at what point did you become aware that, Steve Ditko was Steve Ditko?
Well, okay, so let me sort of address a few things you said.
Yeah.
When he passed away, and I went back to Johnstown because I live in Los Angeles, my dad and my younger brother, met. And one of the first things that my dad said is, we should do a book called Steve Ditko, the Man, because people didn't know who he was, and we knew that. So that's interesting you would say that, because that's kind of one of our missions, is to actually say who he was as a person. And my dad expanded as a family member, as a brother, as a son, as an uncle, as a friend. The other thing is, he and I started writing back and forth in the late 80s. I've known him all my life. He's my godfather. I was born and he was there. So, but he and I wrote a lot back and forth, starting in the late 80s. But again, to address something that you said earlier, he was I'll say a private person. He kept his work separate from his family. But in our writing, I wrote to him with things that were on my mind. Yes, I went to comic conventions. I met, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and Jim Shooter, all these people, and I would write to him about that. But now I'm getting much more involved. I wish I could write to him, because I would ask him plethora of additional questions, and even more on a philosophical note. Something I probably would say is, Uncle Steve, you kept your life so private, and released, very little about yourself. Do you understand that created a vacuum of information surrounding you, which then, nature abhors a vacuum, all kinds of things started to just speculation, innuendos, all this stuff came in to fill that vacuum. That the thing that you despise the most, people, saying things that they were not qualified to say, you generated an environment that created that, because you created this vacuum. Had you been, a little bit more. Now, I say that just sort of offhandedly, because I know that he would say, I don't care, because he didn't really care. So, but he did generate this vacuum of information, which then got filled by all of this, I'll say untruths, half-truths, or whatever. And again, what we're trying to do is just fill that vacuum with with truth from a family perspective in the way that we understood him and the way we interacted with him in our story. So, got to go back to your actual question is when I was growing up, we didn't know what he did as little kids. In fact, my dad always has told this story of him overhearing my uncle talking to his mom, my grandmother on his side, and him saying, coming back from New York one Christmas or for a barbecue or whatever, and him saying, look, I don't want to talk about business. I don't want to talk about what's going on in New York. I don't want to talk about what I'm doing. I'm here for a vacation. I'm not here for business. I'm here for vacation. I don't want to get immersed in that. That's why I'm here. I want to talk. I want to be with my family, and I want to do family things, and I want to be immersed in the family. So I don't really want to talk about that. And that got transmitted down to all of his brothers and sisters and the older relatives. So it was never really talked about. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't comics all around the house, because he would send us things. So I grew up, and my first kind of memory is, being 4 years old or 5 years old, 1963, 1964, and reading, Spider-Man was around. But I gravitated towards Conga. So Conga was something, this Charlton stuff, I just loved it. And it actually probably planted the seeds of my fascination for gorillas or my love of gorillas, But, again, it's interesting, and this is something that we're talking about in our friends. We have a book called Friends and Family that we're trying to, compile and structure and get out there about how to present this information that we have. But there was one time he was showing my older brother how to draw something. They're 4, 5, 6 years old. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Uncle Steve could draw. So I go up to him and I say, Uncle Steve, do you think you could draw a gorilla? Because I like gorillas. And little did I know he's obviously drawing Conga that I'm reading. So he whips out this gorilla. And I was like, wow, Uncle Steve, you're good. But that was the nature of our childhood. And then really when we found out, we were probably in our early teens somewhere. At that point, it was like a non-event. It was like, oh, Uncle Steve did that. Wow. It's like realizing that one of your aunts or uncles or something had, created, Tupperware or something new, oh, they were the ones that actually created the tissue box or something. It's like, wow, that's impressive. But it wasn't something that was, like surreal, mind altering, that it was just something like, wow, because he was still fundamentally our uncle. And that's how we kind of knew him for, our whole childhood. So, and I would say that's probably true for all of my siblings. When they found out, it was like, wow, that's cool.
That's how many brothers and sisters?
I have, there's 5 of us. So I have an older brother, a younger brother, and 2 younger sisters. But there's really, and so my uncle had one brother, my dad, and then 2 sisters. Mm-hmm. So the 2 sisters obviously got married. So there's 2 cousins on my Aunt Annie's side, and then there's I think 5 siblings on my other aunt. So I think there's 11 of us or 12 of us that are the nieces and nephews.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. And it's funny to hear the story of asking him to draw, because I have a nephew who's 6, and like I work in comics myself, and I wasn't as reserved about letting him know. I kind of wanted to nudge him in the right way, but now every time he's over, it's oh, can you draw this? Draw this. It's like, yep, there we go. That's it. But you love to see it though. And you were saying, so you're a comic book fan yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been, and you've been attending more frequently? Or you were saying before you attended conventions and you got to meet Kirby and Stan Lee and all. And what were those interactions like? Were they aware of who you were? Did you just go as a fan just to say hi?
Oh, I did what my uncle despised. I used my name. I all I had to do was say who I was,
Mhm.
and then they were very welcoming. I left Johnstown in 1984, and basically started my life. I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. I got married, had my first child, and I was living my own life. And then the late 80s, he and I reconnected with some letters. And then I moved to Los Angeles in 91. I think around 91. And then that's when comics started to, I saw, we were grocery shopping, and I looked across the street, and there was a yard sale, and I saw a bunch of comic boxes. And I thought, wow, comics. I should probably go over there. So I went over there, and I'm just looking through the comics, and the guy selling it comes over, says, "Hey, anything in particular you're looking for?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Ditko stuff." And of course, we get to talking, and I say, "Yeah, Mark Ditko, his nephew." And he was like, "Whoa, okay." That was sort of mind blown, to him. And he said, "Come here, let me show you something." And he takes me into the apartment complex, into the basement, and he has 2 large trunks full of comics. And he says, I guess he used to, maybe was associated with a comic shop or something like that, or maybe it was just his collection. He said, "I know I have Ditko in there." And he said, "I'll give you both, because of who you are, I'll give you both of those trunks for $200.
Oh, wow.
And I said, "I'll take them." So that kind of launched me into really getting back into comics. Then I'm in Los Angeles. So yeah, I went to San Diego Comic-Con, through the early 90s. And yeah, I walked in to see Jim Shooter and, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and all these people, because I said, "Yeah, I'm Mark Ditko, Steve Ditko's nephew." And it's like, wow, I mean, the DNA is in the house. But Jack, so they knew who I was because I said that. And then Jack and I, we had one conversation I remember, is he said, "Hey, Steve Ditko did Steve ever get a girlfriend, or made some offhand comment?" And then when I would write my uncle, I would relay these messages, and I would, tell him my experiences and what I'm doing and who I'm talking to.
And how did he receive that news? Did he just go, okay, and just move on? Like, is that it? It didn't faze him?
No. You know what? He was who he was. And that's something that, I'm sure with your earlier interviews, especially with Zach, is he had, which to me was probably one of the most admirable qualities that connected me to him, was someone with the level of integrity that he had, and so much certainty of self that was just, to me, it was just admirable. It was somebody who I looked up to. He actually became a bit of a guru to me in that way, because he had such a strong foundation and philosophy of life that when we would write, that's where our conversations went. He would say, "Mark, you need to have a strong philosophy of life so that it will help you make the decisions that you need to make when those things arise in your life." So again, he was like an advisor to me, a life coach, a guru, and he would send me books. "Have you ever read De Bono?" Yes, he did send me, The Fountainhead. "You should read this, and you should read that." And I'd read that stuff so that in our conversations after that, it would make sense. But he knew I was into comics, and I think I had heard later that someone said, "Oh yeah, I was writing back to him, and he told me that he had a nephew that was really into comics," and that would be me. So we conversed what he was interested in, and what he wasn't interested in, he just didn't respond to.
Yeah, and I had a very brief interaction over the phone with Mr. Ditko. It must have been in excess of over a decade ago now, because what had happened was, we have Dublin Comic Con here in Ireland, and for the second year I'd put together a magazine, and we were able to make contact with Stan Lee for an interview. And the best way to correspond was through email. And at this point in time, Stan's eyesight was very, very poor. But what he would do is he would write it in a Word document and it would be emailed over. But when you open it, it was like the opening scroll to Star Wars. It was huge font. But I found that very endearing and reassuring that it was his written correspondence. And then I was curious because at the time I wasn't aware of like a lot of the discussions around Mr. Ditko and you know, this idea of it being a great recluse. But it turned out his office number you could look up; it was listed. So I said, "This apparently is his number." So I had just called it, and he did answer it. Now, admittedly, my phone at the time was an old Nokia, and very, you know, I think the accent on top of that wasn't the best of signals. But he was very reassuring in that he wasn't gruff or dismissive. He said, "Write to me," you know. And at the time, I decided, well, what's the substance of what I wanted to say? This is before I was even like lecturing, I think, at this point. So I decided not to take that opportunity, which I kind of regret not to write. But subsequent to his passing, many people revealed he was in correspondence. Like people would write to him and he would write back. And what you were saying there about him being like a guru to you, an advisor, he does strike in all the conversations I've had in putting together this miniseries and all the reading that I've done. He is a very, as you said, great integrity, but honourable person as well, which, of course, he's created one of the most definitive heroes, you know, of the 20th and 21st century, you know, Spider-Man. My conversation with Mr. Harris, we were looking at like Amazing Spider-Man 33 with the master planner and lifting the building, and you can tell it's all Steve Ditko driving the narrative. Take the text out, and it's pure. The visuals tell the story, and the struggle, the heroism that comes true. It's astounding. And you mentioned like he was interested in, he was widely read is the understanding I'm receiving in all my conversations. And you mentioned he did recommend Fountainhead and such. But he seemed to be, that's just one aspect. Like he wasn't just exclusively reading, you know, objectives. This is his library. Oh, incredible. So that, and it's great. It seems to be extensive. Like he seemed to have read beyond, like, I think people just pick up and go, oh, Fountainhead, Ayn Rand, and just run with that. But it's so much more. He seems
Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the criminal mind, you know, on and on and on. Zach has been coming out to catalog his library. And I actually have very high-res pictures of his library that we've put in Johnstown in a place there where we're displaying some of his stuff. And I'm trying to get those around. And Zach will eventually, he's been cataloging this and all of his writings and little notations in there. So eventually his library, to show how extensive of things that he read, you know, it's phenomenal. I mean, I say he was an intellectual.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was, in my conversation with Jack, I was saying, like, I know people throw around the word genius, but when you look at the way he interprets, like, visually, I said this in all three conversations now. When I was a child in the 90s, Panini in Europe would reprint Marvel comics, and one of the reprints was Spider-Man, which included the 90s Clone Saga, the most recent, packaged in with an original, which was Amazing Spider-Man 2 with the Vulture. And as a kid, the Amazing Spider-Man 2, even though you're talking 30 plus years since it was first published, that still sung to me, you know, it still appealed, it was timeless. And just the ideas that he had, and it is just ahead of its time. And it's some of the visual narrative devices Jack was explaining to me was like, it's almost as if he was foreseeing how first-person shooter games would be in video games decades later. Then what's Jack said, which kind of stayed with me, was, while I was saying genius, he said visionary as well. And he seemed to have just an idea of like how he could see, he could draw what he could see, you know, and not just the visuals, but conceptually how this would work. Even if you look at Spider-Man's web shooter, the mechanical thinking that must have gone into it. You were saying your background in engineering, your company as well into it, that in terms of when you were studying within that field, did you do much in the way of technical graphics or design along when you were interested in comics? Were you interested in producing comics as well? Or was it just mainly as a fan reading comics?
Well, had I known that that I could have had a career coloring, I would have been a colorist. That was kind of my thing. Although we all grew up drawing, always did. From inks, to color, to watercolor. I mean, we were all artists growing up. If there were poster contests or something, we were entering and we were winning. So it was something that we definitely grew up immersed in. And to another point is people will say he was an artist, and Stan will say, or other, he was the artist behind this. No, and he wasn't even just an illustrator. He was a creator. I mean, he really was a creator. In those later Spider-Man issues, it's clear when it was known that Stan wasn't even talking to him, he was plotting all of that stuff. He was coming up with the whole storylines. He was mapping all that out. But that's who he was. As far as his, engineering, scientific bent, my dad has said over and over again, when they were kids growing up, he had his own, secret cabin in the barn that he had built in the corner of the barn, hidden, that he had a hidden key and a hidden way to get into this, which my dad found out and eventually got in there. And he had collections of skulls and feathers and his microscopes and his chemistry sets, and he had taken fingerprints of everybody in the family, and he was a scientist in a way. He loved that aspect of things, even as a kid. So it would make sense to me that he would integrate that into what he was doing, in comics.
That's astounding. And what was his educational background? Like, what did he, in terms of formal study, did he go on to study? Did he go beyond high school to third level, like college, or did he?
No, after he graduated high school, which he obviously was taking drafting, he had obviously drawing classes, but just the standard high school level, classes, chemistry and the sciences and the maths and things. But then, from what I recall, after he graduated, he enlisted in the army, and he went to Germany, post-war Germany, and he was over there for a few years. And then when he came back, he went back to Johnstown, and he enrolled in a commercial art school. So he was taking commercial art. And then after a few years of that, then he moved to New York and enrolled in the art school with Jerry Robinson, and and he moved out there, and he had, at that point, he moved there with one mission. He's getting in comics. At that point, he's committed. We have, again, I don't know what time period these would be in, but we have index cards where he was drawing characters. He would have a headshot on one side, on the other side, a full body shot. And there's stacks of index cards that he was Gold Age characters, some of them maybe that he made up. I don't know, that we have, but so he was drawing. Look, his dad was passionate about comics. His dad would take vacations, and he would sit in his chair by the fireplace and just read comics all day.
Wow.
That was his vacations. So he grew up in an environment where his dad was passionate about Prince Valiant and all these comics, and that's what he grew up in. My uncle was known as Batman, in the neighborhood, and his friend was Robin. So he kind of immersed in that. So at what point did he say, I'm gonna go into comics? I don't know, but obviously it was. I would think it was somewhere in that commercial art phase after he had come back from the military and realizing, the GI Bill, he can go to school in New York and actually pursue that. And then he backed it up and moved to New York.
It's the journey to New York's really interesting because across the podcast as a whole, we've been speaking with some creators like Elliot Maggin, Paul Levitz, Paul Kupperberg, and the recurring theme there has been that they were fortunate to have been in New York. Basically, that you back then you could literally walk in, get a job interview. So the idea to go to New York, it was essential to be in New York. It wasn't until much later, you're talking into the 80s when Corby was moving coasts, and really into the 90s when a rise of the image guys, that FedEx became a factor to ship pages. But that's just really, really interesting, the move to New York. And how much of him did he see himself as a New Yorker then? Like, what did he like see himself more as like New Yorker, or did he still keep wear his home roots proud? Or was he just mentally, I'm a New Yorker now? Did you ever notice a shift?
No, but we were little, 4 or 5 to early teenagers. You don't see that subtlety of who a person was. And the only thing that I can say that I think most people would agree with is he had a very hard line that when he was working, he was immersed and committed to that. And when he was at home, that's what he did. So when he would come home, in fact, as a kid through the 60s, I don't think any of us the kids knew that he even lived out of town, because we would have our family barbecues every summer at our house in Johnstown. And he was there flipping burgers and playing with the kids and wrestling and doing his thing. And Christmas time, we did the rounds through all the different families, and he was always there. So through the 60s, none of us would have said, "Oh, he lives out of town," because every family gathering that we had that was significant, he was always there. So no, and he wasn't saying, "Oh, I'm in New York and I went to the Empire State Building," and he's not talking about there. We're wrestling. He's showing us how to throw knives and hatchets and teaching us, playing and So it was something he had he was able to really compartment his life in that way. And I've talked to people in New York who worked with him and said they had no idea this whole Johnstown aspect of him, his family aspect, because he didn't talk about it then. When he was working, and that's what he was doing, and he was all in on that. So it wasn't something that, and maybe it was just easy for him to stay committed and be focused in the things that he was doing at the moment. He was being in the moment,
It's such a healthy way as well to approach things when you look at it today, in the day and age, like social media and everything else, where it's like we seem to wear so many different masks and personas and who we are and what we do. But again, going back to the sense of Mr. Ditko was the actual article, like what you saw, what you needed was in a professional capacity is what you got as the human being, the family member. He was authentic, that was him. He was present, as you said, in the moment. Has there ever been moments of frustration where it came across, or maybe you might not have been as aware of it, depending on the fan circles, but when something was written or said about, Steve Ditko that you knew to be false, that wasn't it, but you knew, obviously, in his wish was he didn't want to engage or to discuss it, but did anything come across your path and you went, oh, you really wanted to say something? You don't have to say what it was, but it's something where you felt frustrated because, as you mentioned, he didn't engage, but then you knew something of falsehood was there, or something was slightly misinterpreted and you really wanted to say something, but didn't.
Oh, I think all of the family had experienced that at points in time because, but while he was alive, and that's, I'll maybe circle back to that because this is a very sensitive ground that we're walking on right now, because there's people who today have a certain respect for his desire for privacy,
Mm-hmm.
And that actually even today won't cross that line.
Mm-hmm.
Now the family, we see that a little differently because we existed for decades experiencing these rumors and different speculations that we know were untrue or partially true or distort in some way. But we also respected his wishes to maintain his privacy. There was a point where someone, Kat Ironwood, was going to do a book on Steve Ditko. And I've never talked to Kat about it. But from what I heard is she had gotten names and addresses eventually, called these for where people who he went to high school with, and sent out letters to them asking information about Steve Ditko. She called my dad and was asking him questions. Well, my uncle found out about it and was not happy.
Yeah.
And basically told my dad, look, I don't want you to do this. This is his life. He wants to maintain his distance. And he also felt it to be intrusive to the family. So I think at some point for, I'll say, protection of the family, he literally would tell, when we went to his studio to clean it out, after he had passed away, the security guard said he doesn't have any family. He told me that over and over again. If anybody comes here saying their family, I don't have any family. So I think what he was doing was protecting the family, shielding us from, whatever, the press, paparazzi, however you want to say that. So, of course, when he was with family, he was a family member, and but I think when he was in New York, he had an interest in shielding us from that. So we complied. We were like, okay, agreed. We're not going to go out there and publicly say, no, that's not true. No, that's not true. Now, did I, when I was at Comic Cons and I'm talking to someone, of course I said what I had to say. And now you would have a hard time with making me shut up, and not say that stuff, because as a family, we all have a mutual agreement now and understanding that we want people to know who he was as a person. We don't want, just his legacy, and that he had done what he had done for the industry. We don't want that to be the full picture of who he was. In fact, I was at a Spider-Man premiere down in Hollywood, and I was talking, I saw Kevin Feige there, and I went up to Kevin and I was talking with him and telling him what we were going to do. He made some comment about one of the Spider-Man, he had a little ode to Steve Ditko and Stan Lee, and they had like a sort of a graphical signature or something. He said, what did you think about that? And I was like, it could have been a lot more elaborate. He said, well, I have no content, I can only do what I can do. But I was telling him that we are, as a family now, getting more information out there. And he said, you actually need to do that. He said, because if you don't, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, the only thing that will remain is a caricature of who he was, not actually who he was. All the little things that residuals, all the people that maybe knocked on his door or wrote to him and got a bad, reaction or something. That's the only thing that will remain, because that's unfortunately the way society kind of is. So this caricature will be the only thing that will exist. Well, we're trying to put truth out there, and we do that, I think, because that's what he would want. Look, he wants truth. He was an advocate for truth. So we're not saying anything that wasn't true.
No, absolutely. Like, as I was saying, my own experience when I first seen your uncle's work as a child, there's going to be other kids who will be the same, who will see that comic, they'll appreciate the artwork. And you know what? That might be the extent of it. They may never go on to read another or find more, but they'll enjoy that story. The art speaks for itself. as was always his intent. Maybe then if they become fans who not every fan delves into the back matter, but then art is history. History is who we are. It's identity, it's participation. And it is important that, the record is there, because as you were saying, it's so easy, as you put it brilliantly, nature pours a vacuum. So we need to try and make sure that the record is straight. And I think you're absolutely right in what you're saying about the truth. Everything his approach and philosophies in his own creator own stuff really put great proponents about the truth and the right and wrong of it as well.
There's in doing what I'm doing and being visible and being out there at panels and comic conventions and that, I'm not shocked, but I'll say sometimes surprised at how impactful those early comics or his life or whatever was on someone. When we went to New York, and we were getting into his apartment complex, he had a studio, and across the street was his apartment where he lived. The police officer we were talking to said, I wouldn't be a police officer had it not been for him and reading his comics early on. It's like I hear these stories over and over and over again. So, again, to try to, he painted, his life was a certain canvas, they had painted, and the Spider-Man, Doctor Strange was just a small sliver of that. As a person, there was this human side where he supported people, and a lot of his philosophy of doing things, getting things done, pushing through adversity, never giving up, all this stuff. He promoted that to a lot of people through letters, but then that's what his comics were saying. His comics were saying that. There, the one of the few pictures of the 60s with him on his lamp of his desk, it says think, look, all that Mr. A is a story about morals, saying don't do bad things. There's ramifications. There is a right and there is a wrong. Don't read more into it than that. It's a very simple lesson that he wanted to just convey. So him as a person, I think it's getting people to know who he was. I think people will understand his comics better and what he wrote better, which is what Zach really, really dissected, with a scalpel, what his career and life and how they intertwined, and his philosophy. So that's something that we're just trying to add, the family's trying to add value to that by giving more insight into the human side of him.
No, absolutely. And the idea of the right and wrong, the good and bad, like that's what, in essence, when you look at what are the peak, the best, the strongest, most impactful of comics, that's it. It's the right and wrong of it. Since the dark age of comics, the Bronze Age, the 80s onwards, where you have Watchmen and more gritty and morally compromised heroes, like the grey area is now much more present. That the hero villain dynamic is harder sometimes to dissect. There's more of an anti-hero. And then people are wondering, like, why do people go back to the well at the same characters and heroes? It's because it's not the powers, the capes, the situations that make them. It was the morality, the good, bad, the overarching philosophy of it. And let's delve in a moment just a little bit more into like Mr. A and the creator. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing with Ditkoverse. But before we do, how is the relationship, if there's any, with Marvel? Like you mentioned the Marvel Studios and you had an interaction with Kevin Feige. Do you have any contact with the comic division or the cinematic, any connection or communication with Marvel as an entity at all now from the Ditko family?
Oh, sure. Yeah. In fact, I had lunch and dinner with 3 Marvel people just over the past month.
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, we absolutely, they are very attentive to us and our needs. So, right now it's only just been, when they come in town, we connect up, we have dinner, we talk. Or if we happen to, I was at the Kirby exhibit that opened here a month or so ago and met someone at Marvel, and we had lunch, a few weeks later, and he was in charge of all the worldwide Marvel installations in Disney. So he's the Disney connection for all things Marvel. But yeah, I think I would say my relationship, or our relationship with Marvel, is, I couldn't ask for anything more. Right now, I could easily have dialogue, with Marvel. We're not necessarily collaborating on anything right now. Well, there's a few things that are going on, but nothing that really can be talked about right now. But there's absolutely a relationship there.
Oh, that's great to hear, and it's always fantastic when the studios and the companies are engaging with the families. It's that's really important and fantastic to hear.
In fact, I had one other thing is, last year when he won the Disney Legends Award.
Oh yeah.
So Kevin Feige called me a couple of weeks prior to that, and he said, Mark, I know that your uncle didn't like awards and wasn't, this is not something that he would really strive for or think. He said, somebody needs to say that. Somebody needs to make it clear that this is not something that he would have embraced. But so Kevin called me specifically to make sure that was said.
Oh, fantastic.
And to me, that just shows where Kevin's head is at and what he understands. And all of my conversations with anybody at Marvel, it's clear. They understand very clearly who Steve Ditko was and what his role was and is.
No, that's fantastic. I really appreciate that they appreciate his perspective on things would have been. And early on, when you mentioned about like he had early experience with like the commercial side and even going over to Germany with the draft, and what sung to me there a little bit from memory was Disney's story to an extent, just to an extent, but there's a parallel there. The fact that he would end up being a legend. There is the completely different characters in terms of personality for sure, but the passion for storytelling and the fact that many people say that Spider-Man is to Marvel what Mickey Mouse was to Disney. That's been said. At one stage, I think Spider-Man was on the checks for Marvel when they went on public trading. So it is interesting that there is. I only say this because I'm working with David Barry at the moment, making a biography about his father, Cy Barry, who was one of the prominent artists in The Phantom. And my blueprint for it has been the Disney biography, an American original. And then just, there's a few things there where it's like, again, completely different stories of characters. But when you look at it from the work itself, passion, the drive, there is a parallel. So that the bestowing of the legend status, though, is very apt indeed for his contributions, without doubt.
We were happy about that. Yep.
Delighted. And with regards to Beyond Marvel, then, so I came across your website, Ditkoverse. You seem to have recently concluded a crowdfunding endeavor, and I can see in your office there's plenty of Mr. A material as well. So what's the next steps then? So what's the approach to be taking now, and what are the family doing in terms of the creator-owned stories of Mr. A and what? 'Cause these were stories, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Mr. Ditko was working on right up until the end. Like, he was constantly putting out content. He never stopped in his production. So what's the goal, intent, and the future for the Ditkoverse?
Well, one of the things that is driving us is in the early 2000s, he and I were writing back and forth, and I have a friend, David Kitchens, who runs a post-production studio here in Los Angeles and has worked with James Cameron and Steven Spielberg, all these guys, and has won Academy Awards and Emmys and everything. So I was writing my uncle, and I said, Uncle Steve, I have this connection with someone who knows real producers, and what would you be interested in doing? Would you want me to leverage this in some way? So he said yes. He said what, and then he wrote to me about what he wanted. He said he wanted Static to be a movie, big screen. He wanted a couple things, like he wanted a character that he had created, Missing Man, to be an animated cartoon. And so he was talking about his characters and what he wanted to do. So he said, absolutely. And he started to send me, comics, saying, here, show them this, because really, what's a comic? It's a storyboard, for a movie or a show. So, so anyway, we were going back and forth for quite a while on things that he wanted to do and how we wanted to take his characters up to the next level. I have my own business. I'm buried. I dropped the ball. I, just never did the amount of follow through that I needed to. But I need to pick that back up. I mean, I don't, my uncle has said he has very, very few, if any, regrets in life. In fact, the only regret that he said he has is that he didn't make a copy of those Jack Kirby Spider-Man pages when he first saw them, when he gave them to Stan as his draft of Spider-Man. Yeah. He says that would have made so much go away, about what was Jack's, involvement there. So anyway, my uncle said he had that regret. Well, I have the regret of not having followed through while he was alive and getting these things done that he wanted to pursue. So here I am, in a position to be able to, push some of that forward. So ultimately, we're looking at some bigger things moving into more of a mainstream media. But prior to that, we are going to be compiling some things. We're going to do his collected essays. Yes, all his artwork speaks volumes, but his essays are volumes, with words that say exactly what was on his mind, So, and some of them are hard to come by.
That's something of a revelation to me, that because it's so funny, I just prior to this interview was speaking with Jack Harris, and in it I was saying, like, the love that Steve Ditko had for comics was very transparent, and in his text, Walking with Ditko, you could see he had some preliminary sketches for Batman. For some insane reason, DC did not let Ditko do his run. And even the pencils look like it's taken verbatim from the interrogation scene of The Dark Knight. The way it's posed, it's him behind a chair with I'm like, it was decades ahead of its time. But when I was saying to Jack, do you think he ever would have been interested in doing like storyboarding or maybe working in film or something? And Jack was saying he wasn't sure, he didn't believe so, but he knew he was an avid movie fan and that he had a lot of movie stills in his office and reference. And the fact that he did have aspirations for his work to be adapted, and that's incredible to hear that, because did you speak much in the way about movies or go to the cinema with him at any stage or anything? Because he seems to have been like a big movie buff. He seemed to be interested in that side as well. And
this is where I wish I was as engaged in his career and life then as I am now, because I would have asked him all those questions, because our conversations only went to where my interest was or his response was. And that was what sort of led it. It never, I never got that deep into trying to really look at what, deeper into his life. Our letters, I'll say, were superficial in a sense. They were of the time. Hey, my daughter's doing this. The family, one time we had a family reunion, and I took pictures of all of my family and their kids and my mom and dad, everybody just waving. I took a picture of everybody and I sent him all these pictures of everybody just kind of saying how, so that's the kind of thing that our letters, were on. They weren't, digging into the nooks and crannies of these things like that. So, I mean, I wish, but here we are, yeah, that's, but as far as what he wanted to do, that just sort of evolved out of the conversations of me having this connection. He said, Mr. A, he said he loved doing Mr. A when he created him. He loved doing them in the present, and he wanted to see him in the future. So Mr. A was his baby. I mean, that's what he really loved. So that's something that, that we want to continue. So what we're doing initially, just to kind of lay a foundation, is we're going to create we're going to compile all of his essays into one volume. We're going to create a collected Mr. A. We're going to create collected static. So we're going to go through and then basically remaster a lot of his stuff for, I'll say, a modern publication, at a high quality that to me is deserving of who he was. So we're working on these kind of collected editions, and then eventually we'll start, just like our first campaign was pushing out these issues. We have the number 2s and we have the number 3s kind of, getting prepared. So we'll start doing these campaigns. Eventually, we'll push them into the comic shops as a, more of a traditional comic. But then working on these collected editions to kind of supplement that. Again, laying the groundwork for where we want to then go from there.
Well, that sounds amazing. I will be open up to opportunities to collaborate with other publishers onto this as well. Are you going to try and do as much with just as the Ditkoverse, as the Ditko is producing this, or do you have plans to hopefully collaborate in the future with others?
That's exactly where we're at. We're in discussion phases with what channels do we put this on to get that really international audience is really what we're after now. So yeah, we are in kind of, I'll say we are in the courting phase of just actively looking at, we have the material, what channels do we use and what's most appropriate to get this stuff out.
Yeah, no, it's all ahead of you, because I've been publishing for over a decade myself, and you will get some crazy responses. Once I had a project where the publisher turns around and goes, "Oh, this is too far into development for us." What? That just means it's too ready for you to sell. I didn't know that was a problem. But no, I look forward to it. Sounds amazing. And how can folks get behind and support and keep in contact? Because some people might have missed the first campaign, might want to keep in touch. What's the best way to follow what you guys are doing?
Well, we're just really getting started. We had a lot of dragging feet for a number of years. So we finally, we're through that. So right now, in fact, we have my sister is having a new website built right now, which then that will be the portal. So that new website, which hopefully will be up by San Diego Comic-Con, and then we'll be promoting that. That's going to be our portal to all the social media, signing up for getting information on what we're doing in the future, any campaigns, videos. I don't know. I was apparently I'm an old school guy that's still on Facebook. That's sort of my channel for visibility. I run the Steve Ditko World's Facebook group. So we have over 5,000 people on that. So that's kind of my thing. Like, I mean, I'm running multiple businesses here, so I'm spread very thin, trying to lay this groundwork, and the conversations are going on. So, but anyway, eventually the website ditkoverse.com. That's really the channel, and literally anyone. I'm very open. I'm sort of I've always been like my uncle in a sense that email me, Mark ditkoverse.com. Anybody needs anything, wants to talk to me about anything, wants to ask me a question, whether it's personal or business or whatever, mark@ditkoverse.com. I am very responsive. I live with my engineering business in front of my computer. If you don't see a response to me in the hour, you'll see it within the day for sure. So anyway, that all I could say right now is ditkoverse.com, our website. Again, the one that we have now, we're going to be retiring. That actually was put up for the other campaign. I had one prior to that, but we're in an evolutionary process. So the one that's coming up will probably be the one that be the stable one, and that will be the portal.
And will you be having a stall at San Diego Comic-Con or a table, or will you just be there networking?
Yeah, right now, we are not going to have a table. We're having a panel on Sunday. We always have a panel following the Jack Kirby panel. So we'll have that. And then I'm going to be on a few other panels, just talking about stuff that we're doing in collaboration with some others. But so what our plan is, my sister Joanna and I are the kind of right now sort of the ones masterminding like where we're going. This year we're just trying to like stabilize our direction, develop resources, get things together, kind of create more of a map. And then probably starting next year, it will start to attend more comic conventions and start to actually have a table or a booth. Because what we're doing is all of this is leading into his centennial in 2027. So there's Ditko 100. We are branding everything we're doing Ditko 100, D100. So in fact, I've been talking to Marvel about it. We're going to talk to some others about it, and we're looking to anything coming out that's Steve Ditko. We really want to start branding that as D100. In fact, I have this idea. I'm just going to throw it out now.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
Have you seen this latest book that?
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah.
Jack just mentioned it to me, and he was saying he's still waiting for his comp copy. He wrote and edited some of them. So that
this is amazing. So what I want to do is I want to talk to a DC, and I want them to just create a new dust jacket with Ditko 100 on it, because this just came out and it should have really been branded, Ditko 100. So I want to talk to them about putting a new dust jacket out there and sending it to people so it says Ditko 100. So we're trying to get publishers, anybody doing anything, remastering things, reprinting stuff, to sort of jump on this bandwagon. So what we're trying to do is really our activities are trying to get a bigger wave of promotion and things out there, just like Zach's documentary. That we're going to push that hard. And again, so we have a Ditko Con in Johnstown, a Ditko Central Comic Con in Johnstown every odd year. So we're having one this year. It's in September. And of course, now we're leading into the real monster one, which is going to be a centennial in 2027. At that point, we'll have a lot more books released and a lot of stuff, available, trying to just bring greater awareness to who Steve Ditko was, especially for his centennial.
Listen, looking forward to it. It seems like it's great to see the legacy going like in good hands. It's a smart home, because he was always, as you were saying, creating, but then there was a bit of he had a very non-traditional approach to how he got his creator-owned book. So I think in some cases he was still using the cashier check being sent in the post to in some cases, folks are saying. So it's great to see this accessibility to the work. And it was really curious to hear as well about the Jack Kirby pages as well, you mentioned as a regret, because I only recently heard about it, 'cause in my mind I always knew Stan Lee, Steve Ditko and Spider-Man, and the bulk of the early Spider-Man, the stories where Steve basically hand with a code. Here's an idea, fight Dr. Doom, and he would just go draw it and everything.
Have you read the 16 essay series, A Mini History of Comics by Steve Ditko?
I have not. I'm remiss.
Wow.
So that's
okay. So he wrote 16 essays. Okay, so the essays start out when he left Marvel, whatever it was, 67, 66, 67, whatever he left Marvel, he took notes, personal notes of what actually occurred through the development of Spider-Man and these comics. So he had these notes. There was a chain of events in the 90s where a couple of things really triggered him. And one of them was was a comic book journal where Stan said he created that lifting scene and that all he did was give Steve the idea and he took it and ran with it. So there were a few triggers like that where my uncle, and there was a correspondent of his, Russ Maharis, and Russ he was a PR guy, military guy, and he had a long correspondence with my uncle, and he would always stick up for him. And he'd say, I know you don't want me to stick up for you, but I am anyway. So like, I am. And he said, my uncle wrote him back and said, you know, I can't stop you, more power to you. So, but Russ kept writing to him saying, look, you need to say your side. You need to say your side. So in 99, 2000, 2001 timeframe, he wrote 16 essays from his notes on what occurred with Amazing Fantasy 15, Spider-Man 1, and the dialogue and exchange and information of what happened through the developmental phase of Spider-Man. And it is so revealing. You will read those and it will become very clear who was in charge and really probably why Stan stopped talking to him. Because Stan, in these essays, Stan is clearly giving him ideas. In issue 2, Stan wanted to introduce Spider-Woman or Spider-Girl. And Mike was like, who is that? Like, are they friends? Do they go to the same school? Is this now a Batman and Robin team up moving into the future? And of course, Stan can't answer any of these questions because Stan doesn't think that way. He wants sales, So my uncle just didn't do it.
Yeah.
And he said at one point he needed to make J. Jonah Jameson nicer to Peter Parker. So my uncle writes his thoughts on that. And he said the next issue, I made him even meaner to Peter Parker. So there was these dialogues going on, and you could see through these essays that you're reading that why Stan eventually said, oh, Steve Ditko thinks he's a genius of the world, Well, at that point, he was creating something amazing, but he was really rejecting a lot of things that Stan was saying. But it's all written in these essays, about 40 pages of essays about that era.
And is that still available for copies? Are they still in circulation?
Good luck trying to find them, but I can get them to you. And they'll obviously be in our essay compilation. But
that's it. Yeah, daily. Perfect one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the kind of thing that needs to get out there because somebody will read that and go, what? What? Now, this is not from me saying this because I heard it because it was, take your nephew to work day or something. It was, this is his words, him who was there at the time. And my uncle is not known for embellishing things and lying and whatever. He had an integrity. He was saying what he knew. So, but I'll send you those. I'll send you those 16 essays. But eventually, we need to get them everywhere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You should try. I'll ask. I have colleagues who print an academic press. That sounds like something that an academic press would probably definitely take up. I'll shoot some connections towards you as well onto it. But no, that's really amazing.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't read those, wow.
Yeah.
You're much out of the loop.
Yeah. That's a revelation to me now as well. And I suppose not to turn things into too dark a corner, and forgive me, you no need to go into it if it would be upsetting. But towards the end, was Mr. Ditko, your uncle, was he in poor health, or was he just doing what he was loving at the moment? Like sounds like he was discovered at his studio. So Was it a sudden or was it an illness? Because the news when it trickled out to everyone was it was sad, of course, and sudden. But was he even aware himself, or was it just, it was his time?
Oh, you know what? Okay, so he was in his 90s, and we had seen, looked like anybody through their 80s and heading into their early 90s. Yeah, his eyesight was failing a little bit. His hearing was, not what it used to be. So yeah, I mean, his health had been degrading. He was in and out of the hospital. But that year, in 2018, my dad and my mom, the family were very aware that he had gone into the hospital earlier in the year. I don't know if he had fallen or what had happened, but something put him in the hospital. And then in May, they had some contact. I know my dad had called him, and he had gone in the hospital again in May. So yeah, everybody was aware of what was going on. The family was anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad had been talking to him. So, yeah, it was, that he had passed away. It was actually in his apartment complex. It was in his apartment at one night. So, yeah. And because he lived alone, look, I mean, that's the nature of, no one realizes for a while because, you're not having necessarily daily contact. Sometimes he probably would go into the studio, and maybe, weekends he didn't, go into the studio. So I don't know if there wasn't anybody, although he did have I think there was I forget what they call it, someone who just kind of checks in on you after you're sort of rehabbing from, having a hospital stay.
Yeah.
So I think that's what happened is he was supposed to call in, or there was supposed to be some connection with a healthcare worker or something. And then they kind of did a wellness check or something. And I think they hadn't heard from him for a day or so. And at that point, I think my dad was trying to get a hold of him. So I think it was just right at the end when he passed away. It was just, it was just circumstance and situation. He happened to be in his apartment alone, and he passed away. And it took a day or so for someone to be able to get a hold of him and call the police and actually get into the studio, into his apartment to find out what had happened. So I don't know that wasn't anything, unusual from anybody who just lived alone.
Yeah. No.
If the people were aware of his health declining, and he was aware of it, he was in and out of the hospital, that year a couple times.
Yeah. No, and again, I'd be remiss if I didn't express condolences, of course, speaking about him all this time as well, and being a direct family member, and hopefully I've expressed the impact he's had. I'm in a different country. I'm in Dublin, Ireland. I'm one of many fans of his work. It just goes to show his reach and inspirations across cultures and generations. So to sum up and conclude, thank you so much for your time. But what would be at present now? What's the main going forward you would like people to consider in terms of your uncle's legacy, or what would be the main mission statement for Ditkoverse? What would you guys really like to be now going forward? I think there's a watershed moment of what the perception has been of Steve Ditko, the creator of the art, of his work, of his stories, of his characters, no question. But as Steve Ditko, the man, there's always been this perception that's been out there. Going forward, what do you guys hope to see the narrative being going forward now for Steve Ditko, when people consider Steve Ditko the man?
Well, just in terms of, I'll say bigger picture is, with Zach's documentary, that's going to be something that is going to be very telling as to who he was, because there's interviews in there with family members and others. So that is really going to be, that's going to be something to keep your ear to the ground and eyes on. So, but with that, I think what the family has been working on, and we're trying to get it kind of across the finish line, is our Steve Ditko, the Man, Friends and Family book. And that is, something that we're going to have a lot of his personal artifacts. And, when he was in the military, he kept photo albums. He had a photo record of his whole military career, and he had photos on this side and a description of what it was on this side. And So there's we have hundreds of photos of him. So we have a lot of things that we want to put out in this book to kind of illustrate who he was as a person. So that's something I think our mission is not just to get his content out there for a new generation, but to say what he had done, but to kind of take a step back and say who he was, and make things more accessible, like his essays and things like that. So the Friends and Family book, I think, is probably more illustrative of our bigger mission as to just get his name out there and who he was actually as a person. Secondarily to that, we want to get his things that he had done in the past more accessible and more available. And then we'll take things kind of to the next level. Look, what he did with Spider-Man in 2 or 3 years has rippled down for decades. So, there's an opportunity there for some of his characters to be able to do a similar thing. So we'll be working on that. But I'll tell you, I would leave with one parting thought, is in the early photos in the 60s, he had that word think, on his light. And I think I'll just, from my perspective, that was his mindset at the time. Clearly, somebody has that on your thing. What's it telling you? It's like he's telling himself, like, think about what's going on, like really deeply process it. He was that kind of guy. But when we went into his studio after he had passed away, he had another saying on an index card on his desk. And it wasn't think. It was never give up.
Wow.
So to me, as a parting thought and as a direction from himself, is pursue what you believe is, that is in your heart. Pursue the things that you really want to see, to express yourself, and don't let somebody else, there's this one saying that, I have all these quotes that I've been collecting, and I have a document that's 50, 60 pages from excerpts from letters and essays called Steve Ditko Speaks. And what I'm trying to do, again, is just, I'll probably collect at some point all the times he gave people artistic advice, or all the times he gave whatever encouragement. But this one here, to me, again, it's to kind of cap this off. He said, the wants and wishes of others are no reliable guide to one's life and well-being. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It really, really, really doesn't. In terms of you going for your goals, your ambitions, and the things that you want to hold true to yourself. What other people think or say about it, you need to take that with a grain of salt. You need to follow what's true for you, and never give up.
Amazing. That's amazing. Mark, can't thank you enough for your participation in this podcast. It really means a lot as well for the opportunity to be able to interview you and discuss your uncle's legacy and career as well. And very best of luck with everything with the Ditkoverse moving forward. I'll definitely be keeping my eyes and ears open for more. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks again to Mark Ditko for joining me in this final episode of Creator and Conversation presents Steve Ditko Beyond the Myth. This is the first time the podcast has delivered a mini-series. If you, the listener, have enjoyed this presentation and would like more content in this vein, please get in touch via info@tasqart, TASQART.com. And Mark Ditko has made himself very accessible. He was very approachable online when I first reached out to him. My great sincere thanks to him, and he even left his own email in today's podcast. So if you have a question of your own and would like to reach out to Mr. Ditko, you're more than welcome to do so as well. If you haven't listened to our previous 2 installments, they'll be available on our podcast streams, and we will try and make a separate playlist on our YouTube channel search for @TASQ or search for Creator in Conversation Podcast on YouTube. We greatly appreciate any comments. Feel free to like and subscribe. If you have any comments, rebuttals, queries, or points of interest you wish to raise, also get in touch and leave us a comment as well. This has been a great opportunity and something of a passion project for me. I thank you all for joining me, and again thank all of our guests, Dr. Zach Cruzy, Jack C. Harris, and Mark Zen Ditko, who made this mini-series possible. And again, I invite you to check out their work, Mysterious Travellers, Working with Ditko, and of course the Ditko verse as well. Until next time, this has been a copyright production of Macaulay Consultancy 2025.